And then when it came to Watchmen, it was John Higgins who coloured that. With knowing that the art was going to be coloured and that you were working to this sort of strict 9-panel regime, as it were, how did that affect your art when it came to sort of plotting the layout of the pages and sort of like, thinking this bit's going to be much heavier with inking, this is going to be more sort of cross-hatching?
Well, yeah, I mean, the problem with colouring is if you don't know who's going to be colouring it, you have to draw kind of in a defensive way. You have to make the drawing so solid that nothing the colourist does can actually undermine the drawing. You have to make the light sources very, very clear. You have to make sure that the line strength will hold, even if the colour goes over it. But when you're working with somebody that you know and whose decisions you respect, because I employed John because I knew he would make it look not like a regular American comic. My instruction to him was, don't make it look like a regular American comic. And we've both been looking at a lot of European stuff, which tends to use sometimes a much more vivid palette than it was in American comic, sometimes a much more subdued palette. So what John went for was using secondary colours, lots of oranges and greens and purples, whereas traditionally American comics are blues and reds and yellows. So that gave it a kind of a different European sensibility. Maybe it's like you were saying about Martha, it's two things that you wouldn't expect to see together overlaid. I don't know if you're going to come on to ask me stuff about the Watchmen movie, but one thing that I think is going to really help the movie look like the comic book is that they have kept to John's palette, so that the sets are kind of saturated with oranges and purples and greens, and it really, as much as the kind of individual details, just the colour atmosphere of it makes it feel like a comic book. So, John should get a huge credit for that.
Well, I mean, that's exactly what I was going to say, because I can think of cityscapes in Watchmen where he's just given them this sort of purple wash, and I've seen photos of the set of Watchmen, and it seems so detailed. Are they going to kind of push the colours in a way that, say, something like 300 has that sort of almost painterly look?
I really don't know about that. I mean, I know that it's very textural. I mean, the props, the costumes, the sets and everything are very textural, very detailed. And as I say, the colours, even as they exist, are striking. It's not Dick Tracy, that used a really wild kind of palette. It kind of works, and it still looks like dingy New York, but just a slightly different New York. But I expect that they will treat the colour in some way, not in, I think, in the way that they did with not Sin City, 300, where they completely desaturated the colour. But I'm sure that it will have a very interesting texture to it. But I'm as excited as you to see what that's going to be.
When it came to working with Alan, your first collaboration was on Future Shocks for 2000 AD?
Yeah.
I mean, the work you'd done for DC Thompson, was that on sort of gag strips for like the Lino and stuff?
No, I did at a very early stage in my career do some kind of Bigfoot stuff, which was actually working for IPC Fleetway. They used to have a readers page where the readers would send in jokes on postcards, and they'd give me half a dozen postcards and say, draw this up into a layout. So, quite often they should have just gone with the kids' drawings, So I did do that humour stuff, but the stuff that I did for DC Thompson was actually kind of science fiction stuff. There was a thing called The Wriggling Racket, which was about this kind of fungal tentacle thing that ate concrete and was demolishing buildings all over the place. And then I did another thing called The Sharkmen, The Year of the Sharkmen, about this it is this subaquatic race that kind of was a menace to mankind. Pretty, and actually a lot of those stories were adapted from earlier text-only stories that were run in the DC Thompson. So they weren't, frankly, great science fiction, but it was that kind of area, adventure science fiction.
Because I was going to say, I mean, the Future Shocks, in a way, they're like a combination of hard sci-fi, but with like a punchline almost. Because you have to tell the complete story in 8 pages, and it has to be memorable, and end in a gag. I mean, and when it came to your drawing them, I suppose it's a different comparison because there's the Green Lantern Corps backup strips, but in a way it was a similar idea. That you'd have a set up a story, and then there'd be like to use a filming term, the camera would pull back and it would show that the Green Lantern is a planet or something. So when it came to adapting those, did you think in terms of camera angles and stuff that we're going to start off small and then pull back?
I don't know that I ever particularly did that, but I mean those were a lot of fun to do, those Future Shocks. I mean that was at the very beginning of Alan's career, and of course, that's the way that they would start new writers off, was with a little story, because it's no great risk to the magazine. It gives them a chance to show what they can do. And obviously it was apparent very, very quickly that Alan, was capable of doing much more than 3-page twist-ending stories. And he was, it used to remind me of the kind of things they'd have in a comic book called Amazing Adult Fantasy, which was Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, where, you realise this whole planet was just in a drop of water or something like that. And I did a few of those with Alan, and it was good because we got to work together and we became friends and sort of understood the way the other one thought. Your light's just gone out and you...
Oh, that's good. Well, we're still getting the video.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's good enough.
Okay, all right, okay. But there's one particular story I remember called Chronocops.
Okay.
And that was a really complex thing that Alan came up with, where it was a spoof of Dragnet, the old TV series. And I kind of drew it as a homage to the mad parody of Dragnet. And kind of swiped a couple of the characters out of it. But it was a homage, as I say. It wasn't really a swipe. But it was a very complex thing where they're in 3 places at once, and they're in the lobby of the Chronocops building, and there's a bit of four-man action, and they're also hiding behind a potted plant, and they're also walking across in the background. And that was very complex, and I think we both there got a real taste for complexity. And I think, as Alan said somewhere in an interview, he realised that I could draw anything he asked for, no matter how outlandish. So, that was a little kind of a catalyst or whatever for working together on Watchmen, I think.
And when it came to doing that sort of thing, did you find yourself making models in a way so that you could see the scene from different angles before drawing it?
I would sometimes, if it was a complex setup, maybe just draw a plan of it. I was trained as a building surveyor, so I can think in terms of... but quite often if you do that, the interesting thing is if you draw out a plan or draw a sketch kind of layout of it, that just internalises it in your head anyway. You never have to look at that. I remember for another thing that Alan and I did, a Superman annual story called For the Man Who Has Everything. It features a character Mongol, who's a kind of a big, bulky, alien bad guy, and he's got this kind of jutting brow, and like a lot of comic book characters, the way he's drawn from the side doesn't actually fit with the way he's drawn from the front, and in comic book kind of iconography you can accept it, but I thought, no, I'm going to really have to work out what this character looks like. So in plasticine I made that Mongol, but actually because I then understood so completely the 3-dimensional form, I didn't have to look at it. So I don't often make models. If you've got to draw a specific thing, a particular gun or a car, it's really handy to have a model, more valuable than having a photo because you can visualise it. But strangely enough, earlier on today somebody said to me, when you draw a picture, do you see it in your head in 3D, or does the picture appear 3D to you? And it actually does. I realise that that's actually one of the unspoken things about drawing, that you're using 2 dimensions to express the 3 dimensions you see in your head. And when you get really involved with the drawing, you feel like you're moving in and out of it. You've stepped over the edge of the picture, and you're aware of the 3-dimensional space. And that's what building models and things does. It just reinforces that sense of three-dimensionality. So, it's an interesting area.
So actually then your collaboration with Alan on the Superman annual was the first work with him that you've done that's seen adaptation into another medium, because they did it as an episode of the Justice League cartoon.
That's true, yeah. I was very thrilled to see that, and again, the guys who work on the Justice League cartoon, which is Bruce Timm and lots of other really excellent artists, they were really keen that they do it right, And of course I had to compress it tremendously and miss stuff out, but it was a real kick to actually hear lines of Alan's dialogue, just as he wrote them, and to see picture setups exactly as I visualised them, but actually moving. And we got sent some money for it as well, so that was very good.
So they had actually used your original drawings as almost storyboards for doing the cartoon?
Yeah, I think they had. Yeah, there was some compositions, Wonder Woman firing this big, subionic blaster or whatever it was, where it was exactly the shot, or the way Mongol squatted down, and it was very well animated. And as I say, that they've really done their best to, within what they had to do, adapt the feeling of the story and the sensibilities of it.